بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على سيد الأشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In last week's lesson we were looking at the incident when the pagans of Makkah, after consulting the Jewish rabbis of Medina Munawwara, asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam 3 questions. They were, number 1, with regards to the people of the cave. The second question was with regards to Zulqarnain. And the third question was with regards to the Ruh. And I went on to mention that the true reality or the true haqiqat or essence of the Ruh is something which only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. However, certain scholars without certainty have tried to define the reality of the Ruh and the existence of the Ruh, and some of these definitions are mentioned last week and also mentioned in the Sunday gathering. And I also mentioned the shape and the form of the Ruh in terms of the same way our body has eyes, nose, ears and so on. Similarly, the Ruh, the spiritual Ruh inside, he also has the eyes, he also has the nose, he also has the ears, he also has the heart and so on and so forth. Now there is one topic which I didn't mention last week, and that is with regards to the Ruh and something which is sometimes used interchangeably with the word Ruh, and that is the word in Arabic called an-nafs. Now some scholars are of the view that the word Ruh and nafs are the same, and it can be used together. It can be used interchangeably. However, the majority of the scholars are of the view that there is a difference between the word Ruh and there is a difference between the word nafs. That they're not the same thing, but there is actually a farq and a difference between them. A great Maliki scholar in the name of Ibn Bar al-Maliki, in his commentary of Imam Malik's Muwatta, he's mentioned the hadith where he says that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Sayyiduna Adam alayhi salam, he created him with the mud and the sand and the soil of this earth. Thereafterwards, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed the Ruh inside Sayyiduna Adam alayhi salam, and thereafter the nafs. So from this particular hadith we can derive that the word Ruh and the word nafs, they are 2 different things. And then the hadith goes on to say that from the Ruh, the good qualities, the good akhlaq, the good manners, the good characteristics are created or to say they come from the Ruh. So things such as generosity, things such as good understanding, good words, good speech, modesty, haya, these kind of good akhlaq, good characteristics, they come from the Ruh. And then from the nafs, the bad akhlaq, the bad characteristics, or what we call the razail, the vile characteristics, come out from. And that's why when we see the Holy Quran, in particular there is a verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأُحْضِرَتِ الْأَنفُسُ الشُّحْ. Now the word shuh here means greed, lalach, or stinginess in certain contexts. So here you've got the word anfus, i.e. the word nafs, being used with the word shuh, which is a vile characteristic. So what we can understand here is that the word nafs, from the word nafs, or the quality, or from that particular thing which Allah created us with, i.e. the nafs, from there the bad characteristics come out. Even in the very famous hadith where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that a strong person or a wrestler is not that person who can overpower or wrestle a person to the ground. However, a wrestler is someone, or a strong person is someone الذي يملك نفسه عند الغضب, which means who can control himself at the time of anger. That is a strong person who is able to control his anger, where he's got the ability or capability to implement it on someone, but he stops it. Then that is a strong person. So again, when we look at this hadith, the word nafsahu is used with the word ghadab, i.e. anger. And there's many examples, like the example or the hadith from Sunan al-Tirmidhi, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has told us to do jihad. The greatest jihad or the biggest struggle is the struggle against the nafs. Even in another place in the Holy Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the word, inna nafsa la'ammaratun bisu. So what we can derive is that the word nafs is something different from the word ruh, and it is the nafs which is actually encourages us, which is the nafs. From the nafs, that's where all the vile characteristics and the bad things come out, and it is because of the nafs and through the nafs, that's why we sometimes prone to do something bad and something evil. And I mentioned many times before that in the path of suluk, and also it is, if you were to put the path of suluk to one side, it's also a Quranic injunction. It's an order from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that this nafs, we have to suppress it. This particular nafs, we have to get control over it. The vile characteristics in our heart, the anger, using the anger in extreme places, using the anger in petty issues, shahwa, desire, using it in the wrong places, other kind of vile characteristics we have been told by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to suppress it, to control it. And this is quite beautifully mentioned in Surah Al-Fajr, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses the nafs and he says, Ya ayyatuha nafsul mutma'inna, the O suppressed nafs, irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyya, which means that after the nafs, when we've suppressed it and we have taken the vile characteristics out of it, then you return now to your Lord, radiyatan, are ye pleased, mardiyya, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being happy and pleased with you. And then he goes on to say, fadkhuli fi ibadi, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then says to the nafs, then says to this content nafs, that you now enter the group of my pious servants and my pious people, ibadi, wadkhuli jannati, and with them now enter Jannah, and with them now enter paradise. So the crux of what I've just mentioned, what I'm trying to say is that there is a difference between the ruh and the nafs. And I'll just finish off this particular point by mentioning a saying of the great companion Ibn Abbas anhu. Ibn Abbas anhu has said that, again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created human beings with the ruh and with the nafs. And then he goes on to say that when a person goes to sleep, the nafs, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes you away. Because the nafs we have is, because of the nafs we have this kind of alertness, we do idrak of what is around us. So when we go to sleep, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes the nafs away, i.e. we're not aware of what is happening around us anymore. However, the ruh is still inside. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decides or decrees death on that person who's sleeping, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not send the nafs back, and then what he will do, he will then take the ruh away. So what we can gather is that from this particular hadith is that there are two different things. The ruh is always with us, and the only time the ruh will go away will be at the time of death. Even when we are sleeping, the ruh is still there. But the nafs is something which obviously Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes away when we are sleeping, and obviously if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decides to give us death at that particular time, then obviously the ruh will not come back, sorry, the nafs will not come back, and also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take away the ruh as well. Now in last week's lesson I also mentioned that the pagans of Makkah, they tried everything to stop the flow of people converting to Islam. I mentioned that they started persecuting people converting to Islam. That failed. They tried to tempt Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam with wealth and money, with women, with land, with kingdom, with hukumat, everything. but that also failed as well. Now, when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was continuing preaching and Islam became a bit more public in terms of people were now openly accepting Islam, people were now openly criticizing the false idols and the gods they would worship, the pagans of Makkah, the Quraysh in particular, they then started persecuting and torturing, but this time Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself. And it's mentioned in the hadith of Tabrani that sometimes Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would be walking, and the people, the Quraysh, they would then start hurling abuse and swearing at Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Some of them would even start throwing sand and stones and rocks at Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in the hadith of Tabrani mentions that once there were a group of them, they were throwing sand at Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to such an extent that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's entire body was covered in sand. And then a young girl, the hadith goes on to say that a young girl came with a bowl of water. She then washed Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's face and hands, and then that young girl was Sayyidah Zainab radhiyallahu anha, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's daughter. Other ahadith with regards to, which can be found in Sahih al-Bukhari, a very famous hadith, that once Abu Jahl, he was sitting in the haram with some of his friends, some of his evil companions, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was praying salah. Now Abu Jahl then said to his friends that, who has the nerve to go and get the intestines of such a camel and then place it on the back of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he goes into sajda? So Uqba bin Abi Mu'ayth, he then picks his hand up and he says that, you know what, I'll do that. So he went, he got the intestines of a camel, and you know, the intestines of camel is quite big, because obviously camel is a massive animal, so their intestine is going to be very, very big and very, very heavy. So he went, he got the intestines of the camel, and then when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam went into sajda, he then placed it on Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's back. Now Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam couldn't then get up from his sajda. And when they saw that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam finding it difficult to get up from the sajda, they started laughing at Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then it's mentioned that Sayyidah Fatima radhiyallahu anha, she at that time was 4 to 5 years old. She then came, she then moved the intestine from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's back with her own hand. Afterwards, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then managed to very slowly get up from the sajda. He then started cursing Abu Jahl and his friends who made or who did this, and then obviously that particular curse came into effect during the Battle of Badr when they were all destroyed and they were all killed. Many examples again that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would be praying in the hadith. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would go into sajda, sometimes he'd go into ruku. Then from behind Uqba bin Abi Mu'ayth in particular, he would sometimes yank a piece of cloth around Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's neck, and then he would try pulling it, trying to strangle Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Many examples of when the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would be beaten up by the pagans of Makkah. Sayyidina Abu Bakr radhiyallahu anhu would try to go and intervene and help, but then he would also get beaten up as well. So this is what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam went through. And I mentioned this point before as well, that look at what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam went through. He didn't do it for himself. He actually did it for you and I. Because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam guaranteed Jannah. He's a Nabi, he's a Rasul, he's a messenger. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam guaranteed Jannah and paradise. But he went through all the difficulties, he went through all the pain, he went through all the bruises, he went through all the wounds, he went through all the injuries, he went through all the humiliation. Imagine that, by the way, like what I mentioned about having the intestines on your back. You're trying to get up from the sajda, but you can't move because there's a big, massive lard of intestines on your back, and then you've got your enemies on the side laughing and making fun out of you. Imagine how humiliated Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was there. But why did he do it for? He did it for you and I again. He did it so that the word of Islam, the nur of Iman, can come to our heart, can come to our children's heart, can come to the generation which is going to come afterwards. That's why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did it. And how do we repay Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam for the effort and the sacrifice he went through? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam doesn't want any financial effort. He doesn't want any financial repayment of what he did. He doesn't want some money. But what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wants in return is for us to be true believers, for us to be good believers, and for us to follow the ways and the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I will say this, and I'm looking at myself here. I'm not looking at, before we look at, the audience here, I'm actually speaking to myself. How much sunnah, how many sunnahs are we practicing on? We've heard this talk on the Seerah so many times. This talk has been going on for many, many months. We do so many various zikr and tasbih and so on. Now the question is, when are we going to change our life? When are we going to actually think about and acting upon a sunnah? Many, many sunnahs. The beard, the jubbah, wearing the turban. So many sunnahs, the miswak. So many other sunnahs in terms of prayers, in terms of how to perform the wudu, and so on and so forth. So many sunnahs which we hardly act upon. When are we now going to think about acting upon these? Are we going to think about tomorrow? That tomorrow we'll act upon the sunnah? Are we going to think about, okay, let's wait until I finish my degree, then I'll act upon the sunnah? Or let's wait until I get a bit more settled down, I get married, then I'll act upon the sunnah? Or let's wait until I get a job, then I'll act upon the sunnah? Let's wait until I get a house, then I'll act upon the sunnah? Remember, you cannot wait until tomorrow. You're mature, you're body, you are now responsible and accountable for all your actions. If you were to pass away tomorrow, you can't say to Allah on the day of judgment and say to Allah, "Wallah, I was just going through a bit of difficulty. I wasn't married at that time, or I was looking for a job, or I was still young. I had some studies. I had some GCSEs to finish. I had to do my A levels at that time." You cannot use that particular excuse. And unfortunately, this is an excuse which is used when it comes to deen side. When it comes to business, no one thinks about tomorrow. If it's possible to make £20 tonight, or just say £50 tonight, I'm sure everyone will go and make the £50 tonight or the £100 tonight. If it's possible to do a few hours taxi before we go to sleep, I'm sure everybody will go and do the taxi. So when it comes to dunya, we don't think about tomorrow. We think about now and now. But when it comes to deen, we always say, oh, well, tomorrow, or we'll say, I'm still a bit young, let me just get a bit settled, then I'll start doing the sunnah, then I'll become a bit more pious and so on. Remember, brothers, you don't know how long you're going to live in this dunya for. You need to start making an effort, you need to start practicing upon these sunnahs, which I, in many talks, and I'm sure Zameen Saab, Monana Saab here have mentioned many times before, we need to start getting a move on with our action. We need to rectify ourselves. We can't just be doing like listening to talks and thinking, oh, that's it, I'm just going to be automatically pious and so on. You need to make the first move. You need to rectify yourself. And with regard to sunnah, so much reward and thawab in reviving and implementing one sunnah. Very famous hadith of Sunan al-Bayhaqi, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that whoever revives or acts upon a sunnah, he will get the reward and thawab of 100 martyrs. And what is the reward of a martyr? Just one martyr. Mentioned the hadith that a martyr is somebody who dies in the path of Allah. Before the blood falls onto the ground, all his sins are forgiven. So you act upon one sunnah, you get the reward of 100 martyrs, meaning 100 times the reward. So you could imagine acting upon one sunnah, reviving the sunnah, and if the reward of a martyr is his sins being forgiven, you reviving and acting upon the sunnah, it's like you are starting afresh. All your previous sins have been forgiven. So remember, look at what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam went through. He did it all for us. He didn't do it for, as I said, for himself. He just did it for us. He went through all the pain. He went through all the torture. The very least which we can do is like act, as true Muslims, as a true believer, and act upon the sunnahs and the ways of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In the way we talk, in the way we eat, so many sunnahs with regards to eating. In the way we drink, so many sunnahs with regards to drinking. The way we go to do istinja, so many sunnahs are connected with that. The way we talk to people, so many sunnahs regarding that. The way we deal with our neighbors, their huquq, their rights, there's so many sunnahs regarding that. About Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he showed us everything, literally everything. He showed us how to behave, how to do everything, rights regarding hospitality, hosts regarding sharing. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did everything. So it's not like, na'udzubillah, we can say that, or there are certain things of life or aspects of life Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has shown us. He showed everything. And the amazing thing about it is, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was so busy, but he had time for everything. He used to do like bayan talks, he would give da'wah, he would lead the prayers. Sometimes we read the hadith, sometimes his talks would last from one salah to the other. But at the same time, when he was at home, he would do the household chores. He would wash his own clothes. He would mend his own shoes and sandals. He would cook his own food. This is how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was. So this is what we need to aspire to. We need to certain sunnah, even if we can't manage all of them, then the very least, at least try to get the habit of doing one or two sunnahs every day. Just get into the habit of doing some sunnah. And obviously don't use the excuse, we'll do it tomorrow, we'll do it next week. Remember, tomorrow or next week never comes for some people. So always try to get in the habit, get in the habit of rectifying yourself. This is what Islah is about. Islah, rectification. Rectification is that we rectify our inside spiritually and also outwardly as well, in terms of our action, in terms of our conduct, in terms of our huquqs and other kind of social behavior. That's what Islah and rectification is. Now, just very briefly, the next point which I want to mention is that during Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time, there were many enemies. We mentioned a few already, like Uqba bin Abi Mu'ayt, Abu Jahl, Abu Lahab, and so on. And a question arises here is that why were there enemies? Or why did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam have enemies in the first place? Because we mentioned before that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had impeccable akhlaq and manners. So if someone is really nice, soft-hearted, he shouldn't really have enemies. But why did all of a sudden Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had enemies, and these were like staunch, haters, enemies of Islam? Why did all of a sudden Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam have them? Now the reason why, again, is that this is like a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this in a way is like the nizam or the sunnah or the way of Allah, the way He wants to run this particular world. I mentioned last week with regards to Iman bil Ghaib that the whole purpose of Iman bil Ghaib is that we believe in the unseen. Now if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was to show us angels, if He was to show us hereafter and so on, then there's no point of Iman bil Ghaib. Everyone will be believers. But the whole concept of Iman bil Ghaib is that Allah doesn't show these kind of things so that a person then can choose Iman or can choose not to accept Islam and become a believer. Now the nizam or the world which we are living in, it is the divine way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that whenever He creates something, He always creates the opposite. As He mentioned in the Quran, وَمِن كُلِّ شَيْءٍ خَلَقْنَا زَوْجَيْنِ, which means that for everything, خَلَقْنَا زَوْجَيْنِ, we have created pairs. So we're not just talking about animals, that there's pairs for animals or creatures. Everything there's a pair and there's an opposite. So just say, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created nur. So in contrast, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created zulma and darkness. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created good, khair. He's also created shar and evil. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created angels, And in contrast, Allah has created devils and jinnat. So what I'm trying to say is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has always created the opposite of that particular thing. Similarly, the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the nur and the light, guidance, hidayat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has also created the opposite, i.e. misguidance and dalala. And the reason why Allah has created them too is so that a person, out of his own will, out of his free will, out of his own accord, could then choose which path he wants to follow. Because if Allah had just created guidance and not misguidance, then when you look at it, that person, because there was no other way, there was no other rasta, there was no other tariqah, there was only one way, and that was guidance, he is now compelled to become a believer. He is now compelled to accept guidance. If there was only good, he's always going to be good. There will be no kind of, there's always compulsion. He doesn't have that free will. He doesn't have that choice of good or bad. So this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has done, is that whenever He's created something good, there's always evil attached to it, so that a person can choose the good or the bad. And that's why in another place in the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَا لِكُلِّ نَبِيٍّ عَدُوًا شَيَاطِينَ الْإِنسِ وَالْجِنِّ, which means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for every Nabi, for every Prophet, He's created an enemy, عَدُوًا شَيَاطِينَ الْإِنسِ وَالْجِنِّ, from the human devils and from the jinnat devils. Meaning that for every Nabi there are enemies from mankind and there are enemies from jinn kind. And this is what we see that with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was sent as a prophet and a messenger. He had enemies like Abu Jahl and Abu Lahab, at the same time trying to stop the flow of hidayat and guidance, trying to stop the flow of people converting towards Islam. When we look at Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam, so Musa alayhi salam was sent as a prophet. But at the same time, there was Fir'aun trying to stop people from converting to Islam. Take an example of Ibrahim alayhi salam, but at the same time there was Namrud who was trying to stop people from converting to Ibrahim alayhi salam's faith. So what I'm trying to say is that for every, and this will happen until the day of judgment. Look at Isa alayhi salam, when he comes later on, there will be Dajjal trying to stop people from becoming Muslims and so on. And this will happen until the day of judgment, that for every Fir'aun, there will be a Musa. And similarly, for every Musa, there will be a Fir'aun. So even if there's a good, like if we were to take a modern day example, if there is a good Imam, a good scholar, a good righteous scholar and so on, trying to convert people towards the deen and so on, there will always either be shaitan there trying to stop them, or there will even be humans there. Humans who don't like that particular Imam for some reason, trying to stop that person from converting, or you could say, trying to bring youngsters towards the deen. So this will always happen. There will always be an equal kind of, muqabla or dispute or mukhalafat between good and evil, between the khair and the shar. People trying to, say for example, be in the path of suluk, say for example. So again, there will always be people trying to stop people from going to that particular path. So there will always be good and shar, good and evil, until the day of judgment. This will always happen. This is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's word and nizam works. And again, the main reason, as I mentioned last week, is because so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can test the individual, so that that individual, out of his own free will, can accept Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's command, or out of his own free will, go to the wrong path. So on the day of judgment, then obviously he will have no one else but himself to blame. And that's why it's mentioned in many places in the Holy Quran, that when that person will be sent to the hellfire, when he will be sent to Jahannam, he should not do malamat, he should not criticize or lament anyone except himself. Because obviously he chose that particular path, that's why that person will be punished accordingly. And that's when we stop it to after when we said what is our